Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/PettyRevenge. In today's episode, former employee turns me in for fraud, enlists his father/lawyer to push it. Coworker did no work, then wanted a job reference from me. Not happening. Rejected former boss nephew's job application. It's the little things that make it so worthwhile. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Former employee turns me in for fraud, enlists his father/lawyer to push it. I was a public employee for many years. I had a middle management role for about 20 years. I reported to a department head, who reported to the mayor. I had a small staff, typically 5 to 10 people who were mostly part-time. They rotated every few years and I tried my best to make their time with me valuable. I helped them pad out their resumes, paid for trainings, and more. Tim was initially a decent employee but quickly decided he was the greatest employee of all time. His overconfidence often led to mistakes or being overextended, and he needed bailed out. He was good at basic tasks but had a hard time with math, grammar, and interacting with adults. Part of my job was seeking federal grants for small infrastructure projects. Think adding ADA benches to nature trails and curb cuts on old sidewalks or bridges on walking paths across ditches. I would write the grants and specs. The small staff would help administer the grant. Sometimes they would do the work. Sometimes they would oversee contractors. The grants were extremely clear and included a matching component. Sometimes we would add cash or equipment time or staff time. Sometimes we would have volunteer organizations match with labor. We were doing a bridge grant and I put the employee Tim in charge. It was phase 3 of 3 and we had a lot of experience. There were 21 bridges we were replacing in batches of 7. Tim just had to keep the process going with volunteer match labor hours. The process was practically automatic. All he had to do was show up with materials and stay out of the way. He did an adequate job, barely. I had to keep him on track to stay in spec. We are spending money to improve water quality. He wanted to improve recreation. We sent a lot of emails and texts about it. The department also used project codes to track grant spending. Each grant had a code and it was very easy to code all the time and materials, though the accounting department. The volunteers signed logs each day and the process was pretty tidy. That fall Tim continued to struggle with basic tasks and eventually demanded a promotion for his outstanding work. He did not meet the very clear requirements for a promotion, government requirements, through his own laziness despite being given opportunities to become qualified. Eventually, he became intentionally negligent and put himself and others in danger. I called him into the office after an egregious incident and offered him the opportunity to resign or be fired. Resigning means he could be eligible for rehire in a different department. Fired means he is blacklisted from the city. He refused to resign and so I terminated him. He seemed shocked. I think he thought it was a bluff or scare tactic. He thought he was a critical cog in the machine. But he was a thorn in my side. His dad is a well-known local attorney. I had pulled Tim's state criminal record and on close inspection it was clear Daddy was bailing him out throughout life. Assault charges dropped. DUI pled to a traffic violation. Possession pled to an infraction. Tim decided to come after me. His first move was to call the federal division that oversees my grants and report fraud. They launched an investigation. My records were 1000% immaculate. They called him into a meeting and his proof of fraud was that he felt that the bridges should have been a lower priority and the money would be better spent elsewhere, so the fraud was misuse of funds. But the grant specs were followed precisely by him. He had tried to divert funds and I had stopped him. I had written evidence. The project he had accused on was the literal poster child for success and was included in a slideshow to the legislature on the success of the grant program. The feds and city powers were livid for wasting time. I had reams of perfect documentation. He was yelled out of the building. Then he filed a wrongful termination suit. He told his dad about the apparent mistreatment and his dad filed. I contacted the city attorney and dumped hundreds of pages of documentation, with a summary, in his email. I was in City Hall when Daddy Attorney came slinking out of the legal department apologizing for his idiot son. I heard from a mutual friend Daddy gave Tim a thorough reaming and withdrew the financial support that had allowed him to live on part-time work. He is doing better today, but right around that time his wife discovered his ongoing affair, the mistress got pregnant and things got rough. Coworker did no work, then wanted a job reference from me. Not happening. Years ago, I was part of a programming team. One of the senior team members had been promoted beyond her abilities, due to work she'd done some years before on a suite of software tools that everyone in the company was forced to use, despite them being much clumsier to use than most equivalent third-party applications. But that was her claim to fame, getting promoted for her contribution to mediocrity. She somehow felt that this entitled her to sit in her office with her feet on her desk, reading paperback novels all day, while the rest of us engaged in various programming projects. The company eventually went into a tailspin, and there were multiple rounds of layoffs. Our whole division got wiped out, eventually. Some years later, I'm happily employed elsewhere. Ring ring goes the telephone. Me, hello, this is Mr. McDonald. Human Resources Guy, good afternoon, Mr. McDonald. I'm HR guy, with XYZ Company. One of your former co-workers, Ms. Novel Reader, has applied for a programming position with XYZ Company, and said you could give her a reference. Me, oh, did she now? Fascinating. What would you like to know? Guy, how long were you and she in the same department? Me, about 5 years. Guy, great. What can you tell me about Ms. Novel Reader's work during that time? Me, well, nothing, I'm afraid. I never actually saw any. Guy, you were in the same department for 5 years, and never saw any of her work? Me, in 5 years, I never saw any work from her. Long pause. Guy, does that mean what it sounded like? Me, absolutely. Guy, thank you for your time. Me, don't mention it. Rejected former boss nephew's job application. Used to work at a small construction company, and our old boss nephew, who was like 48 at the time, worked with us and generally made everyone's lives miserable. He complained about everything constantly. Always angry. Typical short, angry little guy. Brought his wife back from the Philippines, she hated his guts, etc. The kind of guy who would pull a gun on someone getting a frisbee from his property. Was in the military and constantly talked about what a badass he was. Really sad sh*t honestly. Anyway, such an entitled asshole, and he treated everyone with such disdain because his uncle owned the place. So at some point, I lose my job, and I suspect it's because he's been talking sh*t to his uncle about me. The way they fired me was weird and sudden, this just isn't working out type of thing. So I go across the street and get a job at the competition. Better pay, better position. Like a year later, I hear he's been fired from his job by his uncle for some egregious bullsh*t. I think he was trying to get another coworker fired and called OSHA on them, but ended up getting the whole company in trouble and fined. So, I'm sitting at my desk one day and my boss comes to me and says, "Hey, you used to work at right? You remember this guy? He's applying for a job here." I take one look at the application, stare at my boss dead in the eyes and say, if you hire this guy it will be the worst mistake you ever made. He nods, yikes. Glad we spoke. Thanks. Garbaged the app. Dale. You turd. It's the little things that make it so worthwhile. So, my ex-husband treated me horribly for the last 11 years we were married. Started with him telling me he wasn't sure he loved me anymore while I threw up every day all day, made it to work, and was pregnant as you aren't doing enough for me. He eventually figuratively beat all the love I had for him out of me by just progressively being worse. Gaslight my kids into thinking he was the victim. Anyway, a decade later his new rich wife and him are too cheap to kennel their dogs on their frequent weekend trips. Usually talks one of our adult children into dog sitting even though they all live at least an hour away. They asked me to come over as my ex and I still live in the same town to see the dog we had together, visit and to not tell him about it. I'm so cool with that. So while I'm there I do petty sh*t just to annoy him with him not ever knowing it was me. Like taking his work badge which hangs by his front door and drop it behind the bookcase next to it. Moving things in his den from one drawer to another as everything has to be exactly in a certain spot or he loses his shit. Only one or two at a time so it doesn't look deliberate. Even let some air out of one of his tires. Not enough to be flat, but enough he will have to make an extra stop to fill it up. One of my kids a few months later said it was weird how pissed he got about a tire being less full as it causes uneven tire wear. He's very obsessive about it but too lazy to check his tires. My kids are unaware and I know little things just stab him, lol. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.